What was the scariest? We need to leave, now. Gut feeling that you've ever experienced? Viewing to see a flat that didn't exist. Not my story, but one my mum told me from her 20s when she was living and working in London, UK. I'll do my best to retell it. Also, I'm dyslexic, so apologies in advance for grammar. This story always gives me the creeps though when I think about it. So back in her 20s, my mom was living in London and looking to move into a slightly bigger place. She'd found a really good price for a flat slightly out from the area she was hoping. She'd called the agent to book a viewing, and that's when things turned odd. So the guy booking the viewing started asking weird requests and questions, such as to bring her passport, her age, race, and physical appearance. Would she be coming on her own? Did she have a car, or would she be getting the bus? He very persistent that she should arrive by bus as it would be easiest for her. Explains it was a straight road down from the bus stop to the apartment block. Obviously quite unnerved by this call, but still interested because the flat looked ideal, she and my dad, who were dating at the time, decided to check the exterior and surrounding area. The day before the viewing they drove there, first passing the bus stop he was indicating her to arrive via. From the bus stop there was about 150-200 meters of derelict wasteland that she would have to walk past to get to the flat. And standing at the end of the street in the location this apartment block should have been was a huge abandoned building. Smashed broken windows, graffiti, no entry signs. The lot. Definitely nothing inhabitable in sight. Still, when she tells this today, you can see how much it rightly shook her. Of course she didn't go to her viewing. However, she informed the police, advising them of the planned time and place. From what she saw, from following up with them, they didn't appear to take this tip seriously, and little was done. A couple years later though, while in a pub with some friends, she gets chatting to a guy she just met through mutual friends that night. He was in the police, and through conversation her story came up. He said that area at the time of her viewing had a huge human trafficking problem. Still gives me chills. When I was about 8, in 1985, an old El Camino pulled up alongside my friend and I, with a man saying he knew my mom. He didn't know her name, but something felt off, so I grabbed my friend and ran. When we told my mom, she went white and called the cops. Turns out, this guy thought my mom had stolen his job at the steel mill she worked at the time and wanted to hurt her. He already had a warrant out for nearly killing his wife that morning. When I was 16, my mom had a terrible feeling about an outing some friends and I were going on. Hindsight being 20/20, it was a stupid move for me to go anyway, but I did. Long story short, there was a car accident, my 2 best friends died, and I nearly did. It'll be 30 years in November. I still regret getting in that car every day. My friends might still be alive if I hadn't. My mom had that mama spidey sense. She still does. More recently, I was at our other house in the country with my oldest son and his wife and kids. There was a break in the storms, and my son decided to go home instead of spending the night. I was filled with dread at the thought of them going home so late, since we were dealing with intermittent but severe storms. So much dread that I started crying and begging them not to leave. Thankfully, they agreed. We all started home the next morning with them following me and my husband. We came up on this stretch of road that we know has no lights at night, to see police barricading a washed-out bridge, and cranes retrieving cars. We all piled out of our cars to ask the officers what happened. Apparently, there were several cars that had kept going, not knowing the bridge was out. The lone survivor in the first car had told the police that they went off the bridge at about 9:30 p.m. That's about the time my son wanted to leave. My husband just looked at me, and my boy hugged me extra tight, because he knew what could have happened. Me and my little sister went camping in the woods very close to our house when we were kids. We'd seen this bald guy with a blue shirt and a dog walking around, which isn't unusual for the area. You'll often see people walking and say hello. For some reason though, I just got this tight feeling in my chest, and my sister must have too, because we both just gave each other this look. I don't know what it was that made me do it. This is very out of character for me, but I took a photo of the back of him as he was walking away. A while later, We see the same guy again near the lake. He comes over and asks about the tent we're carrying, where we'll be setting up, and are we camping with our dad. We say yes, we're just going to see him now, a lie. We must have had the same moment of psychicness, because we walked off up a fork in the path until we were out of view, then looked at each other, and jumped down a path hidden by the bushes and waited behind them on the parallel trail for a bit. The guy watched us walk off, pretended to play with his dog until he couldn't see us, then turned around and ran up the path after us. Thankfully he didn't see us hidden, and carried on up straight where he thought we'd gone. We decided camping was a bad idea and went home. That evening my mum shows us a post in the local residents group, which is a picture of the same bald guy trying to break into someone's house. Apparently he'd just been walking around trying people's front doors and claimed to be a repair guy when he was stopped. I dread to fucking think what his intentions were, but it was very lucky me and my sister knew those woods so well, otherwise we wouldn't have thought to go down one of the hidden paths. After graduating undergrad I was working as a caseworker for individuals with developmental disabilities and got assigned a new case for a young man who had autism and severe behavioral concerns. I met him at his grandmother's house since she had custody of him since his parents weren't around. I think mom was in prison. Met this young man who was probably about 6 feet 0 inches and weighing around 250 pounds but had the developmental capacity of a 5-year-old child with a hairpin trigger temper. The house he was living in was absolutely destroyed, with the other piece of furniture that was not smashed up was an oversized beanbag chair in the living room. Grandma gave up trying to send the kid to school since he would absolutely destroy the place if he was forced to go. Grandma was no peach, but I felt for her and wanted to help. One of the meetings I was having with them, the kid and Grandma seemed especially tense, like pacing around the room and smacking the walls. After about an hour of trying to get stuff done and realizing that it was not going to happen on this trip, it happens in this line of work, I decided to call it since the kid was becoming more and more agitated. Grandma was annoyed I would have to come back again, but we scheduled for a week or so out and left my business card with a reminder of the appointment. I leave to go back to my home state for a few days, and when I get back I get called into my supervisor's office. I guess the night I left the kid had a complete breakdown and beat his grandmother to death. No one noticed until the kid came wandering outside after a day or two covered in blood. I probably missed everything by less than 3 hours. I was 12 at the time, and my favorite thing in the world was spending the night at my grandma's house. We lived in the sticks at the time, and my grandma lived closer to the nearest town. Thursday night was grandma's night. I felt something off one Thursday night and asked my mom if I could just stay home with my mom and dad. They reluctantly agreed. I went home, watched some TV, and went to bed. My bedroom was on the adjoining wall to the living room. I wasn't really asleep, but I heard my mom keep saying my dad's name over and over again, with a hint of panic. I sneak out to the living room, and my dad is on the couch with his head tilted back, snoring really loud. Which wasn't uncommon, but my mom was beside him, shaking him and telling him to wake up. She yelled at me to go back to bed. I didn't, obviously. I snuck to their bedroom to call 911. I told the dispatcher that my dad was asleep and my mom was trying to wake him up, but she couldn't. Eventually the phone call went to the living room and my mom talked to the dispatcher. They sent an ambulance to the middle of nowhere. My dad had taken a bottle of diazepam to try to commit suicide. I remember sitting on the floor and holding his hand and repeating over and over that I loved him. The ambulance came and took him to the hospital. Lights and sirens the whole way. We didn't know what happened during that time, but we found out a day or so later, and that is when our world changed. I am very sure if I did not call 911 that night that my dad would have succeeded, and it would have probably have drove my mom over the edge as well. And I have no idea why I didn't want to stay the night at my nanny's. I just had that feeling that I needed to go home. Back in 2019, me, my husband and 2 girls aged 6 and 9 were on a road trip in the south. We had booked an apartment in Atlanta through Airbnb without knowing the neighborhood at all. It was bad, really sketchy, with a lot of creepy-looking people hanging around. We went into the apartment, and immediately my 6-year-old said, "I don't like it here." The door didn't lock properly. The beds were dirty. There was rotting food in the fridge, and the bathroom had not been cleaned in ages. My husband called the owner, who was furious and refused to give us a refund. To de-escalate the situation, my husband offered to not leave a negative review if we could just get our money back. The owner agreed but asked us to wait for him so that they could talk about it in person. As soon as he hung up, I told my husband that we needed to leave, now. We hurried to the car, and as we pulled out of the parking garage, we saw the owner driving up with 4 friends. He didn't see us and we bolted out of there. Ended up at a hotel on the 14th floor, didn't even feel safe at street level. I stopped by a friend's house to watch a ball game. His wife and I were just relaxing and someone knocked on the door. It was the middle of the afternoon. He opened it up. He was expecting others might come by also. I hear him greeting someone. The guy was his brother I had never met, but had heard about. Very sketchy looking guy, meth teeth, scrawny, long greasy hair. My friend had told me that he had a brother who lived in the area who had a serious drug problem. Buddy is talking to his brother about nothing and the guy gets a call on his cell. Whoever called, all he told them was, "Not yet, I'll call you later." Seems pretty obvious this guy has come to rob and most likely to take out witnesses. I look at my buddy, it seems he has come to the same conclusion. Now my buddy's wife is a no-nonsense type of woman, sweet, but athletic. On the tall side, she had left the room to go to the bathroom, or so she said. She comes back in the room with a handgun. I'm thinking, WTF did I walk into? But she calmly says, "Ron, you're strung out and came here with bad intentions. You need to quietly leave. If you get any ideas, Chris, their son, is sitting outside in his truck to make sure you go." Ron doesn't say a word. He just turns and goes out the door. We can hear his old pickup drive away rapidly. Chris comes in and says, "He's gone. I don't think he's coming back." They asked me to leave so they can decide what to do. They have already called the police, who are well acquainted with Ron. The next morning my buddy calls me. The police said they found his brother in the trailer park where he lived, murdered with multiple gunshots. They are guessing he was in serious drug debt and had come to rob his brother. I told my buddy I was sorry. He said, "Don't be." When we were in our teens, my sister and I were walking our dog in our local forest area very close to our childhood home. We were about to leave and had just clipped our dog back up when a lady appeared out of nowhere and started chatting to us. She was odd. She told us her dog would love some socialization with our dog and could we go back with her for 5 minutes. What I hadn't clocked, but my sister had, was that her dog was nowhere to be seen. The lady was almost rounding us up to head back towards the forest when, little did I know, my sister had spotted a van out of the corner of her eye. I was still oblivious at this point. Suddenly, my sister screams "Dad," and to our luck, my dad had finished work and was now out on a run. He starts waving and running towards us, and as we turn back around, the lady had vanished. My sister looks back over at the van and sees the lady closing the passenger door, and it's speeding off. Dog still nowhere to be seen. I believe we were minutes away from abduction. It was divine intervention that my dad happened to be at the right place at the right time. My brother and I were kids, playing hide and seek in the front yard of our house. My brother was 3, and I was 6. My brother was supposed to be counting and finding me, but he was taking forever, so I peeked around the side of the house to see what was taking so long. He had lost interest in the game and was standing near the front gate, which led to the street. As I'm looking, I see a brown car pull up with 2 men inside. The car wasn't familiar, and neither were the men. They both got out of the car and approached my brother. They started asking him questions and moving closer to him. I remember feeling panicked. I had learned about stranger danger in school and knew this wasn't right. I ran around the side of the house, flew through the back door, and screamed, "Someone is trying to kidnap Steve!" My dad didn't hesitate. He got up and flew through the front door. When the men saw my dad coming through the door, they bolted and peeled out. From that day forward, we weren't allowed to play in the front yard anymore. It's a really scary memory for me. When I was around 5 or 6, I was in my front yard and this car drove up and the driver wanted to know where this street was. I pointed that it's down there. He asked me where? I said down there and pointed. It was a side street maybe about 100 yards away or so. He asked where again and told me to come closer to the car and pointed out. At that point something clicked in my brain and I just screamed, "Daddy," and that guy peeled off and drove away. When my brother and I were 5 and 6 we visited a family friend's place. They lived in a massive block of flats. It wasn't uncommon for kids to be playing around outside. My brother and I were out on our own, no other kids, and this guy from one of the ground floor flats invited us in. We were skeptical, stranger danger and all that, but he said he knew my parents. He actually didn't, it turns out. So we went in. He went into the kitchen and brought us out Ritz crackers and Pepsi, while we awkwardly sat there in silence. I can't remember if we actually ate/drank. But there was a horrible feeling in the room and just silence. We then saw my mother walk past his front window yelling out names looking for us. We got up and were like, "That's our mom." And he tried to get us to stay put but we ran for the door. Anyway, she slapped us, I think in relief haha, and dragged us away. I brought it up to my brother recently, we're in our mid-30s now, and asked if I remember correctly and that it was a bad situation, and he said yes. Yikes. A friend called me and said, "There's a wildfire 8 miles away. Can you help me move my horses?" So I drove down. She was wrong, it's 8 miles by car. Under 2 as the crow flies. We got the first set of horses out and down to another farm. The second set, I'm working on and suddenly, things get quiet. It's as if the world stopped for a minute. I look at the horse and the horse looks like it's ready to run. I take a deep breath and suddenly, the noise comes back, the wind is hot AF. And the light changes. I told Sherry, the girl I'm helping, "We gotta go now. No time to shove the horses into the trailer, they are smart enough to survive." And I let them loose. We run to the truck, and the barn is already on fire. Then, we get in the truck and notice the fire past us and is blocking the road. So, we jump out and ran to a small pond for the horses. And we dive in, hoping the fire doesn't burn us. It was about 20 minutes of hell. It might have been longer, It was insanely scary, hot and loud. We got rescued by the fire department's water-dropping helicopter. It landed in the field and pulled us in. We got lucky. The truck was burned to the frame. And the horse Sherry let go died. The one I let go survived but was burned. That's most likely the scariest moment. I was freshly married in my early 20s, living in Fallbrook, California. My husband, ex, was a Marine and was at work, and I was driving home from visiting family further south. In order to get into Fallbrook you have to travel along this long dark and windy street called Mission Road. It's already a super dark night, about 11 p.m., and it's a little foggy as well. I'm slowing down and coming around this slight bend in the road and all of a sudden the hair goes up on my neck, and I feel incredibly anxious. About 5 seconds later, a young woman jumps out of the brush directly ahead of me, maybe 50 feet away, on the left-hand side of the road, while waving her arms in the air and gesturing frantically for me to pull over. I swerved a bit to the right, slowing down even further, but I did not stop. She was young, maybe early 20s or even late teens, and a little dirty, and I was immediately conflicted over continuing to drive. But something told me not to stop under any circumstances. I got further up the road, slowed a little more, and dialed 911 with one shaky hand. The dispatcher said she'd send someone to check, but encouraged me not to feel badly. Apparently there had already been calls about this girl over the last hour, and they were unable to find her when police followed up. I heard a few weeks later about some carjacking/robbery attempts in the area. Very relieved I listened to my instincts that night. In college I was studying at my school's business school building, waiting to meet a friend, and I had a sudden sense of dread. I texted my friend that I would just meet her at her dorm later instead of meeting at the business school, and I left to walk to a nearby library instead. When I got to the library about 20 minutes later, I checked my phone and I had nearly 20 missed calls and texts from my friends who knew I was at the business building. Literally seconds after I left, A student entered the building and stabbed multiple people, killing one professor and injuring several students. It happened in the room I had just been in. I was at the state fair with my mom and my best friend. Friend and I were looking at the rides and the games. This creepy guy his blonde girlfriend kept babbling at us about taking headshots, and that he was a modeling agent. He just seemed off and really sleazy, and the girl was giving me the creeps, so I pretended that I saw my mom telling us to come and grabbed my friend and dragged her off. She was close to 5 feet 8 inches and not a small girl, 13 years old. I was 4 feet 9 inches and around 65 pounds at 14 years old. A few days later, there's a news story and rumors going around the school about 2 girls being kidnapped, assaulted and murdered. They were taken from the fair the same day we were there, just few hours later. The creepy couple were Gerald and Charlene Gallegos, serial killers. I was at a family gathering, basically a reunion but just for family within reasonable driving distance, probably 30 people altogether. It was at County Park on a small lake with some grills and buildings, just an empty hall with some picnic tables inside. You could rent for this kind of stuff. The sky started darkening as a storm was approaching. All the coolers, chairs, balls and other kids' toys, etc. were brought into the building anticipating the rain. The plan was to wait it out since afternoon showers are common just about every day in the summer. Something in the air didn't feel or smell right even though it appeared to be just a regular afternoon storm. Hair on my neck was standing up and I was in full flight mode. Can't really describe it. The feeling in the pit of my stomach can only be described as absolute dread. I told my wife to take my daughter and get in the car. My brother-in-law took one look at my face and said, "What's wrong?" Apparently I was white as a ghost. It wasn't even raining yet and I was full on panic, yelling for everyone to leave. Something isn't right. No one else was that worried, mostly concerned with how I was acting. I went out to the car and as soon as I was about to turn the key the tornado sirens went off. We were not far from wherever they'd put those, or they are just stupidly loud, because it was deafeningly loud. Now the rest of the family is pouring out of the building to their cars, kids crying, and I look across the lake maybe a few miles in the distance, and see a funnel cloud. Got the hell out of there, as did everyone else. The building we had rented for this family barbecue thing was completely annihilated. Literally just a slab of concrete and a shit ton of debris all around. It was hit dead on by an EF3. That's insane, but I fully know that feeling. When I was 8, my family was driving home from our summer holidays. My sister was only a few months old and my parents were definitely tired and wanting to get home as quick as possible. While we were driving it started pouring at the same time. I was unbelievably car sick and begging for my parents to pull over. My dad pulled into a Tim Hortons and my mom took me inside to the bathroom. I remember not throwing up, my mom being annoyed that we had to stop just for me not to be sick, and then trying to find my dad's car in the downpour. We got back in the car and back on the road. Both my parents not believing I was sick. Not even 5 minutes later we're back on our route, and the road is an absolute mess. Trees and debris everywhere. My dad pulled over to talk to someone in a truck and he said, "You just missed it. A tornado just blew right through here, you missed it by seconds." My parents changed tune and just knew I must have sensed something that day. When I was around 9 or 10 my mom took me with her on a business trip to a nearby city. This is before smartphones, when you still had to MapQuest stuff. We were supposed to meet my mom's friend/coworker at the mall for something. Since her friend had given her directions we didn't bother going down to the hotel computer to print directions. I think there was maybe one there. This was around 2000 to 2001. We got lost and ended up pulling into a small storage unit place to pull out a map. It was just 2 rectangular buildings, maybe a total of like 20 units. I don't remember why, exactly. But I was really scared and kept crying and asking if we could just go back to the hotel. I assume she got fed up with her kid crying in the passenger seat and she couldn't quite figure out where we were, so we went back to the hotel. The next day they found the bodies of 2 teenagers in one of the units we pulled in front of. I was hammock camping while riding my motorcycle through Arkansas. I had a dream that I was getting pulled over by the cops on my bike. The flashing lights were super bright in my eyes. And as I woke from my dream, I noticed my blue hammock tent is lighting up like flashing police lights. I immediately felt an adrenaline spike and went into full flight mode. Packed my shit up faster than I could even put my boots on. Hopped on my bike in my underwear and rode a mile to the top of the campground where the showers were. The second I stepped into the shower cabin, the sky opened up and cloud-to-ground lighting started striking trees in the campground every 10 to 15 seconds. I could have been royally fucked up by a lightning strike had I stayed sleeping between two of them. I was a high school teenager around 13. I'm petite and look way younger, so looked at least October 11th. I was in my school uniform on my way to school, and our local shopkeeper stops me. Starts talking to me as usual and asks me what my plans are for the day. I look down at my uniform and tell him I'm going to school. He asks me if there's anything interesting happening, and I responded with, "As a matter of fact, we have a mini trip from my geography class." So he offers me a few snacks, which I declined. Now, the reason I declined it was because he was speaking to me from the back door of the shop and asked me to come to the back storeroom to collect the free snacks. I started feeling really strange and declined and said, "I have to go, I'm getting late." He then asked me for my number and I got freaked out and said I don't have a phone and ran. I remember him shouting something at me, but I was too scared to hear him out. When I got back from school, I told my parents about it, and my father went storming to the shop to confront. Well, the coward of a man hid while the owner of the shop apologized. It made me wonder, if I was a naive teenager who actually walked in for the free snacks, thinking he was being friendly, what would this grown man have done to me? Keep in mind, he looked like he was in his early 30s and I was 13 in my school uniform, looking like a 10-year-old. I've had a few close calls as a young girl, but this one stood out the most to me. I was around 10 or 11 years old and had been invited to a sleepover. My mom didn't really like me going to those, because I'd usually end up staying up way too late and then being cranky the whole next day. When she dropped me off, she told me her usual send-off of, "Just remember, if you want to leave, I will come get you. It doesn't matter what time it is, just call me." The sleepover party itself was the usual routine. We watched a movie, gossiped, prank called some boys, this being before cell phones and caller ID, broke out the Ouija board, etc. It turned out that the girl hosting the sleepover had an older brother, high school aged, who also had some friends over. I remember they stood in the doorway of the rec room where we were, and something about them made my blood run cold, and I just remember thinking, "I'm going to go home." I went upstairs and asked to use the phone, saying I wasn't feeling well and needed to go home. Her mom at first told me no, and then berated me for being a baby, but I just kept saying that I needed to call my mom, and I still remember the feeling I had that I needed to leave. Finally, I was allowed to use the phone. My mom came to get me, and we swung by Dairy Queen on the way home. My mom was always cool like that, and I still remember the huge feeling of relief I had when she pulled up and I hopped into her car. Years later, I found out that the brother and/or his friends had molested some of the girls at the sleepover while they slept. No one reported it at the time, and I think it actually took years for any of the girls to compare notes and find out that they weren't the only one this had happened to. I feel bad that that happened to them, but still glad that I listened to my gut and got the hell out of there. When I was a little boy back in the early 70s, we lived on a small hobby farm in central New Jersey. One night there was a huge storm with thunder and lightning. We were gathered in the family room when there was the loudest crack I'd ever heard in my short life, accompanied by a blinding flash of light. The power didn't go out, but the light bulb in the floor lamp next to the chair where my father had been sitting moments before had exploded into hundreds of tiny shards. There was the acrid smell of an electrical fire, but it wasn't coming from the lamp. I asked my father, "Is the house on fire?" "Yes," he bellowed back at me. I started running for the door, but he grabbed my arm and yelled, "Don't move!" I was terrified, and in my 5-year-old mind thought I was about to perish with my parents in a conflagration we could easily have run out of. I became hysterical. My dad released his hold on me, but my mom grabbed me as I again tried to run for a door. I said, "Stay put. my dad shouted. I started sobbing that we were all going to die and yelled something back at my dad that he was going to kill us all. He didn't take it well. What I didn't understand at the time, and not until many years later, was that the house was clad in aluminum siding. My dad was an electrical engineer and understood that if the house had sustained a direct lightning strike, it would have become a huge capacitor that would have discharged tens of thousands of volts through any watery, ion-filled human that contacted both the house and the wet ground just outside the door. As it turned out, the hit wasn't direct. Lightning had struck a huge maple at the back of our sheep paddock about 200 feet from the house. I went out the next day with my mom to explore and still remember seeing the remnants of the exploded tree scattered across the entire paddock. The fragments were bone white, bleached by the sap having been boiled out the instant the lightning struck. And the burning smell inside? It was an electric shaver my grandmother had given my father the previous Christmas. It was charging above the bathroom sink, and of course there was no such thing as a GFCI outlet, at least nobody had them, back around 1972. Years ago I was at a club with some friends. I was at the bar and for some reason looked down at the other end of the bar and saw two guys quietly arguing. They tried to keep from being overheard, but I saw their agitated face. I went back to my group of friends and told them we should go. This was a popular club and it took us forever to get in, so they didn't want to leave. I don't know what came over me, but I picked up my friend's girlfriend, she was barely 5 tall, and started walking to the door. She was kicking the entire time and the rest of the party followed me outside telling me to put her down. When we got outside we heard the distant pop pop and people screaming. We looked at each other for a second then ran for our cars. I forgot to put her down and was still carrying her over my shoulders. Update. It was the early 1990s and we were at a club in Miami. If I recall correctly from the local news, it was a drug deal that went bad between two groups. No one was killed but they wounded each other and a couple of innocent people. LOL, I'm still not carrying her today, the legend are false. Those two eventually got married and they mentioned me in their speech, something about the other groomsmen holding me back so that I don't get the urge to carry her across the doorway. I'm a teenage girl who worked at a restaurant/pizza shop. I was harassed by these two men one weekend who were totally wasted, so they were kicked. The following weekend they returned, and they tried to sit next to me, at counter which is connected to bar, but they couldn't, so they chose a table across from me and moved both their seats to look right at me, then would only order from my counter instead of our waitresses, were staring at me, making jokes about killing a girl, and kind of just freaking me out. I ended up going to our upstairs employees only section to fold boxes, up there all alone down an hallway where nobody would hear me. I ended up feeling sick to my stomach as I heard someone walk up the stairs and whispering, and I closed the door and turned my music off and texted me mom. The two followed me up there, then tried to go down then unlocked hallway, but another waitress noticed them bothering me and caught them trying to come after me. I just had a gut feeling as I heard them coming, and she came down the hallway and told me to be quiet and hold our body weight against the door. We waited for them to leave as they stood there, waiting for me to come out before making some remarks about not knowing where I was, then going back down. My dad came and picked me up early because I just felt so off. The following day I had to come in for another shift, and as I was clocking out the TV started playing a true crime documentary on a girl with the same name as me who was kidnapped and assaulted by two men. My stomach dropped and shortly gave my notice after that. I realized I wasn't going to be protected there, and wouldn't be surprised if they returned again. My ex had been planning to have me killed and make it look like a home invasion. His behavior had shifted in a very odd way the week before. I found out later he had a woman pregnant behind my back and had planned to move her in and ship my kids off to the state. Their dad is already dead. He wanted to collect my life insurance. I got up right after he left for work that early morning, got dressed in the first things I could grab, woke up my kids and told them we just had to go. I told them not to ask questions right then, that we just had to leave. The door that lead from our garage to the inside of our house was always religiously locked. That night it had been left unlocked. In the weeks leading up to this our security alarm had been bypassed, and he tried to blame my oldest son when my son didn't even know how to do that kind of thing. My husband taught someone else how to do it. We were driving back from an impromptu family vacation. My husband and I were both driving cars, too many people, not enough alert drivers, and I was following him. We were in the left lane passing a truck, and I suddenly had an overwhelming feeling that we needed to slow way down and move over immediately. I called him and told him that we needed to get over, go slower than the truck, and turn our hazards on. He thought I was a little crazy, but he's learned to listen to my gut feelings and did it. Suddenly we ran into a freak ice storm and the truck slipped off the road. The car that went past us on the left slid into oncoming traffic, and 3 other cars behind us proceeded to slide off the road. There was a big dip on the side of the road, and one of the cars even tipped over. We somehow came through unscathed and made it home safely. Another time I was driving to work and I was behind a work van with ladders on top of it. It wasn't particularly busy on the highway, but someone was behind me somewhat close. I had a horrible feeling wash over me that I needed to move over right away. I moved one lane over about 15 seconds before one of the ladders flew off the van. It hit the road right next to me and the car that was behind me ran over it a little, but luckily wasn't impaled or anything. I've had this feeling several times in my life and have even canceled entire vacations over it. I don't know if anything would have happened for several of them, but I truly think I've avoided some serious trouble. I grew up in a not-so-great area, which is an understatement to say the least. When I was a teenager, we were all at stages where a lot of the kids were making the transition from badly behaved teens onto different paths. Some of us realized it was time to get our heads down and stay out of trouble. Others decided to double down and go on to do much worse things. One evening in the summer, a group of us were out in a park, just playing. Because although life was rough and complex, we were still actually children. Every now and then we stopped pretending to be tough-hardened teenagers and just let ourselves have some innocent fun. Over the evening, a few other friends of friends joined. There was a lot of us, but there was a really cool atmosphere. Jokes, fun, and no one was getting up to mischief. We were all just enjoying being young and amongst friends in the sun. I was playing tag with another kid, which was amusing because we were technically too old for that, but still young enough to enjoy it. A couple of other people joined in and it was all good. As we were running around, I noticed another group of people join and I stopped. The kid I was with said, "It's fine. I know them." But I felt a whole body chill. I stopped playing around and went over to get the friends I came with to tell them we need to leave, but because the vibe was good, they wanted to stay. I tried to tell them we really need to leave, but all I had was this feeling. The new group were older than us by a few years and one girl was very vocal. She called over and asked my name. I told her, and then I said to one friend in particular, "We need to leave, now." She just laughed it off and told me to chill. The girl from the other group walked up to me and had an issue with the fact I was chasing her friend during the game of tag and started shouting at me. I started walking away. Then I felt a slam to my head. The girl had followed me and hit me in the head with a brick. I got to my feet and turned around. Her and all her friends had makeshift weapons, and a few had bats. I don't know if they had arrived with them or they were already in the park somewhere. The weapon that scared me most was a solid plank of wood with rusty nails in it. 3 of them held similar planks. I was hit across my back multiple times with them. Then when I fell to the ground, they took turns stamping on me. All my friends stayed further away. One screaming my name. Others screaming run. I had always been taught to stand and fight, but as I got to my feet, even I knew it would be silly. There were so many people and they were all armed in some way. But even if they weren't, I couldn't have fought them all. So I started to run as fast as I could. My legs were shaking like jelly. My thighs burned. I felt so sick. They caught up to me 5 times. Beat me to the floor with their weapons and stamped all over me. Each time I got up and run as fast as I could. At one point a boy caught up with me. He was wearing a balaclava and he said my name as he come up behind me. I recognized him instantly. He was the big brother of one of my best friends. He'd practically been my big brother too since I was about 5. He told me not to let on that he knew me and to keep running but listen to him as he chased me. He told me about a place they used to hide drugs and told me to go there and hide in the drug stash area. He told me how to cover myself once I was in there, and told me not to come out to anyone else calling my name but him. He told me they would kill me if they caught me. Then he pretended to trip to the floor, and I run literally as if my life depended on it. I found the hiding place. I curled up in a tiny space and hid myself. I bled from multiple injuries and could barely breathe through broken ribs. I stayed there as a group of people came in and called my name, terrified they'd find me. I stayed there all night until my friend's brother come and got me the next morning. He scooped me up and he cried as he said sorry that he let them do that to me, but he couldn't go against her and he couldn't let her kill me. He took me home and cried again that he was sorry. I've never seen him since. The next day my friend come to see me and she said I'm so sorry I didn't just leave when you asked me to. I was so injured and could barely see through swollen eyes. We never made it back to being friends. A week later, a girl I had grown up with. Literally I'd spent nights at her family home. Was at every birthday party of her family's. She was there that night too. She didn't join in but she was another silent friend in a crowd of people that beat me to within an inch of my life, because one girl decided she didn't like me. This childhood friend had avoided me since. One day she came and sat beside me and she said, "Did you call the police?" I said of course I didn't. And I genuinely hadn't. It wasn't the done thing and I wasn't about to go against rules our environment set. She said she wants to kill you because the police come to her that night. All I could do was shrug. I didn't call the police. A day later a girl attacked me from behind, with a knife. This time I fought back hard. It was one-on-one and I wasn't going to let myself get hurt like that ever again. I hurt that girl very badly and I don't regret it. I was lucky she didn't stab me. But somewhere in the tussle she dropped the knife and it just disappeared to the side somewhere. She was sent by the original girl who attacked me, who was now furious. I had hurt her friend. I felt like it was never going to end unless she found me and killed me. A day after that my childhood friend approached me again. The girl who had instigated the entire attack on me had been arrested. I stated again really firmly I did not call the police. For the first time in our friendship I saw her really cry and she said to me, "No, I know you didn't. They arrested her because the day before she attacked you, she killed a girl in the same park." She said the girl looked at her funny and tried to take her backpack as payment. The girl refused. The bully girl attacked her and the other girl fought back. So the attacker and her friends beat her up, took her to a body of water in the park, held her down, and stood on her head until she drowned and then threw her backpack in with her. I remember that detail so specifically because I remember realizing it was never about the backpack. She just enjoyed hurting people. I felt the coldest feeling throughout my body. It's hard to articulate what it felt like. My childhood friend looked at me, tears rolling down her cheeks, and she apologized to me and told me I could have been killed too. And to this day I don't doubt I would have been if I hadn't have ran and hid. I owe my friend's brother my life, but like I say, we never spoke again. So I never got to thank him. There is only one other time I ignored that gut instinct, and it ended very badly for me, and it's a story I don't want to share. But it's safe to say that now whenever I feel that need to leave, even if it doesn't make sense, I trust it, even if it means leaving alone.